Hello friends, my name's Emile and welcome finally back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Apologies on this episode taking so long to come out. However, we are back and today we're taking a look at some hot super minis. We start with the Ford Fiesta XR2, 84 horsepower, 1,852 pounds of weight. That doesn't sound particularly hot on paper, but back in the day the XR2 was a very quick little car. Anyways, of course this is the least powerful vehicle here today, however it is also the lightest, although not by as much as you might expect. So, Fiesta XR2, of course this went up against the Mark 1 Golf GTI, which has already gone round the track before in a very old episode. So, how does the Fiesta compare? Well, when it comes to the driving, the Fiesta's alright, actually. It isn't massively quick. You wouldn't expect it to be, you know, it's got 84 horsepower, it's not going to set the world on fire. But, I mean, through the corners it's alright. There is a bit of an issue when it comes to the differential. It isn't great. It will try and spin one wheel. That was sort of a bit of a common theme amongst these cars today. Of course, was with the retro hot hatches as well. They had a bit of a differential spinning up issue. It's nowhere near as bad as it is in the dry because, of course, being in the wet, the wheel can sort of spin a little bit more, which means that the diffs aren't quite as bad, if that makes any sense. It's weird, but yeah, basically cars with bad diffs don't suffer quite as badly in the rain. So the Fiesta is better to drive in the wet than it is in the dry. It isn't amazing though. I'm sure if you put some upgrades into this thing, sorted that differential out, this could probably be a relatively capable D-Class race car. As it is from standard though, it's alright. You know, there isn't really much more to it. Next up, Honda Civic Si from 1986, 91 horsepower, 1,955 pounds of weight, slightly more powerful than the Fiesta, slightly more weight than the Fiesta. Yeah, so the 86 Civic is actually surprisingly a very good handling car. I drove the Honda CRX recently, not for one of these, but I did drive the CRX relatively recently, and the CRX was actually surprisingly decent to drive as well, and this car shares much of its characteristics. It is better to drive than the Fiesta. A little bit slower feeling when it comes to straight line speed. It does weigh 100 pounds more, you know, sure it has 7 more horsepower, but it doesn't really offset the weight at that point. Yeah, so the Civic is slower than the Fiesta, if you can believe that, but it is a good handling car, certainly. This, yeah, I was actually genuinely surprised with how good this car handled. It actually kind of reminded me of the Mini Cooper S in a way. The Cooper S was a good handling car, very slow car, but good handling, and the Civic kind of shared a lot of that car's traits. I would say the Civic is fractionally quicker and probably could take fractionally less corner speed. But yeah, the Civic isn't a bad car. I really enjoyed driving it, actually. It's a pretty good car. I would say go for the CRX if you can. The CRX is just more powerful, and so on and so forth, and it is the slightly better car to drive. But the Civic certainly is not a bad little car, actually. I can imagine it's quite an overlooked car, this one, but seriously, give it a look. It's not a bad car. Next up, we move on to the Renault Clio Williams, and we finally have some power now. 142 horsepower, 2,233 pounds of weight. This is the most powerful of the retro retro Superminis, sorry, here today. Of course, you know, with 142 horsepower, it isn't really comparable to the Fiesta or the Civic. This car's a lot quicker than both of those. The Clio to drive is great. The Clio Williams is known for being one of the better handling hot hatches of its day, and you can really feel that through the corners. It is a very good handling car, this one. It's also relatively quick as well, actually. Again, 142 horsepower and just 2,233 pounds of weight means that this thing, you know, compared to most of the cars I drove before this can actually shift relatively quickly. It's not quite as quick as your modern hot hatches, you know, obviously they have, you know, 180, 200 horsepower, but, you know, the Clio certainly isn't bad. It didn't really have too much of the differential issues, which was nice. Front wheel drive handling, it was a good car to drive, the Clio. Of course, as we all know, the Clio can make a pretty good race car if you tune them correctly. I believe these things are supposed to be incredibly fast in D-Class and C-Class, and driving it stock, it's not hard to see why. Clio Williams is a good car to drive. I would recommend giving it a blast if you haven't already, because, yeah, it is a solid car to drive, and out of all the sort of RS Clios, this is the best handling of all of them. Next up, we move to something a bit more modern. The Abarth 500, 158 horsepower, 2,050 pounds of weight. As far as modern Superminis go, this is the lightest one of the day. In fact, it's lighter than the Clio Williams, which is quite incredible. So, the Abarth 500, how does this thing drive? It is very, very good. I've always liked the Abarth 500. It is a very cool little car. I've always liked the Fiat 500, so naturally I like the Abarth 500. And honestly, in the wet, this car actually prevails a bit more. In the dry, sort of, from what I remember, this car didn't do fantastically well in Season 3. It did relatively well, considering, you know, the power deficit and so on, but compared to some of the hot hatches, it sort of fell behind a bit. In the wet, this thing, because it doesn't have too much horsepower, that actually works more towards its advantage, because it hasn't got all that much understeer. Which means it's a lot better, you know, and it's lightweight as well, which is nice. It's a very chuckable car, very fun car to drive, this one. And when you want to drive it seriously, yeah, it's great. It is fantastic. It's obviously, I would probably take the Abarth 695. Of course, I drove that in a review not long ago, and I loved it. That hasn't been around the track yet. And, you know, that would obviously be a lot quicker. But the Abarth 500 certainly is not a bad little car. I really enjoyed driving it, and I would recommend the Abarth 500 to you all. It's a good car. Go drive it. It's nice. Moving on now to something a bit more substantial, we have the Ford Fiesta ST, 197 horsepower, 2,720 pounds of weight. The Fiesta ST, of course, this now weighs almost 700 pounds more than the 500. Does have a fair bit more power than the 500 does. Ultimately, when it came to the driving experience of the Fiesta, I've never minded. I actually do kind of like the Fiesta ST. It's a cool car. Handling wise, it was alright. You know, coming from the Abarth to this was definitely a lot more heavy feeling than the 500. The 500, of course, you know, it's a relatively lightweight, in fact, it is a very lightweight car. The Fiesta at 2,720 pounds, you know, it's still relatively lightweight for modern day cars, but, you know, compared to some of the things here today, it's one of the heavier vehicles, and you could kind of feel that in the way it drove. It kind of reminded me of the Viper GTS in a way. You know, the Viper, when that went round, I believe I drove the no, I didn't. I drove the Corvette Z06 before I drove the Viper. The Z06 felt very lightweight compared to the Viper. The Viper was a very, very good handling car, but it did feel, you know, sort of heavy, a little bit lethargic and a little bit slow. You know, again, Viper GTS is a great car. The Fiesta is a great car too, but the Fiesta shared sort of that handling trait with the Viper, which I found kind of interesting. Next up, a Renault Clio RS200, 197 horsepower, 2,685 pounds of weight. Same power as the Fiesta, a little bit lighter on the weight front. However, the Clio and the Fiesta are pretty different to drive. The Clio is a bit more of a snappy car to drive, I will say that much. I'm not really a fan of the modern day Clio. I really don't like the way this thing looks. I don't like the flappy paddle shift gearbox thing that shouldn't exist in a hot hatch. However, it is a slightly more sharp car than the Fiesta. I would say the Fiesta, in my opinion, is the better driving of the two. I prefer driving the Fiesta. The Clio isn't bad though. It has got short gears, it has got a snappy gearbox. It doesn't... The gearbox isn't great, admittedly, you know. It has a bit of the A45 AMG syndrome, not quite as bad as that. Basically, for those of you who don't know, the A45 has extremely short gears, which means you constantly have to shift and you're never quite in the correct gear with the A45. The Clio had a little bit of that, although not too much, you know. It wasn't quite as bad as it is in the A45, but it still isn't great. Admittedly, you know, between the Fiesta and the Clio, I would go for the Fiesta every day of the week, but the Clio wasn't bad. Straight line speed-wise, it was that tiny bit quicker. than the Fiesta. Through the corners, it was also probably a little bit quicker as well. Around a track like this, you know, the Clio is the quicker of the two. You know, if you went to a track with a bit longer corners, then maybe the Fiesta would be a little bit quicker. Next up, a bit of an oddity now. We have the Nissan Juke Nismo RS, one of the most pointless cars ever conceived. 215 horsepower, 2,884 pounds of weight. That means that this is the heaviest of the front-wheel drive cars here today, and the modern. And it also is the most powerful of the front-wheel drive cars, tied in fact. So, the Nissan Juke Nismo. A car which, let's be perfectly honest, shouldn't exist. A hot crossover. Why do you exist? I just lumped this in with the Superminis because it was something a bit different. And I thought it'd be kind of amusing to see how this car would perform. Handling wise, you know, I've got to say it, the Juke was surprisingly good. You know, coming from driving the Clio and the Fiesta, I have to say, I actually didn't mind driving the Juke. It wasn't a bad car. Does have quite a bit of understeer. You know, it is a heavy car. You know, 2,884 pounds. You know, that's getting up there with sort of the more bigger hot hatches that we had around. So, it is a heavy car. You can feel the understeer. Differential can slip a little bit. But straight line speed wise, this thing's quick. It will shift, you know, compared to all the other cars here today. It will shift in a straight line. It is quick. It isn't bad. It really isn't that bad in the wet. In the dry, this thing, I didn't like it, but in the wet, you know, the Juke wasn't bad. It was not bad at all. Next up, Mini Cooper JCW GP, 215 horsepower, 2,557 pounds of weight. This is our last front-wheel drive car of today. So the Cooper then, I do actually need to check this, but because it has the same horsepower as the Juke, I'm willing to speculate maybe these two have the same engine. Potentially, I believe they're both 1.6 litres. I'll check that later. But the Cooper, how does the Cooper drive? Well, it's alright. It is quick. I will certainly give it that. As far as straight line speed goes here today, there's only really one car that can match the Cooper when it comes to straight line speed. The Cooper is, you know, it's on par with some of the more, you know, built up hot hatches, you know, the Focus ST, Astra VXI, you know. It's a bit of a bottle rocket, really, which is nice. Handling wise, it's alright. It isn't the best. It does understeer a little bit. It is a little bit better handling than the Juke. You know, it doesn't have to quite throw around as much weight as the Juke. Around the track, the Cooper is very quick. But, you know, I'd probably still go with a full-sized hot hatch over the Cooper. You know, I'd probably go for a Focus ST or something like that. But the Cooper certainly isn't bad, and compared to all the Superminis here today, again, it is the quickest when it comes to straight line speed, apart from maybe one. And that's our final car. This is the Audi S1, 228 horsepower, 2,899 pounds. Overall, this is the most powerful car here today. It's also the heaviest car here today, and there's a very good reason for that. It's because it has four-wheel drive. It's the only four-wheel drive hot super mini. So, the S1. Yeah, this thing's quick. Four-wheel drive, 228 horsepower. Most powerful car here today. Fastest in a straight line by far. And of course, it has the advantage of four-wheel drive, which means, you know, traction-wise, this car should be the best one here today. It's a decent car to drive, the S1, actually. You know, again, my preference will fall to, you know, stuff like the Escort Cosworth, the Lancia Delta, which we saw go around in the retro hot hatch episode. You know, they had a similar amount of power to this. They were better handling, but, you know, they can't match the S1 when it comes to speed. Look how quick this thing is, you know, compared to everything else here today. The Audi S1 is amazingly quick. Yeah, it is a very, very quick car, this one. Really surprised me. I did actually kind of enjoy driving the S1. It was nice to drive something, you know, a bit quicker than the previous cars here today. Compared to the Mini, it's better handling than the Mini. It's better handling than Duke. If I had to pick between the Duke, the Cooper, and the S1, I would pick the S1. Just because it's, you know, it's four-wheel drive, you can build it up a bit better, and so on and so forth. Anyways, on to the times, and unsurprisingly, the S1 is the quickest car today, going into 76 with a 130.822. Beats out a Focus RS and an Astra VXR. That is a very quick car. The Cooper is also very quick, going into 81st with 131.246. Beats out the Escort and the Delta. Beats out a Clio V6. Just misses out on a Lancer Evo 9. So yeah, very, very quick car was the Cooper and the S1 actually. Moving down the board, we find the bulk of the rest of the cars. The Juke goes into 92nd with a surprisingly good time of 132.701. A little bit off a Lancia Stratos, quicker than a Subaru BRZ. The Abarth 500, probably the biggest surprise of the day, going into 94th with 133.530, which is a very quick time. I mean, beats out both Civic Type Rs that we've had around. Quick car. Clio RS200 also did surprisingly well, 96, 133.796. Yeah, very quick time from the Clio as well. Considering I didn't particularly enjoy driving the Clio, I was very surprised with that. The Fiesta ST goes into 98 for 134.244. The slightly heavier handling of that kind of hampered it a bit. Still quicker than a Dodge Charger RT and a Subaru SVX. And it's not too far off an EK9 Civic either, which is pretty decent. Moving down the board once again, we find the Clio Williams in 106th with a 136.746. Just misses out on a Corrado VR6, a little bit quicker than a Peugeot 308 GTI. Not bad for a car which is very old at this point. And finally today we find the Fiesta XR2 in 118th with 144.203. Does beat out a Mazda RX-3 and, surprisingly enough, the Vauxhall Astra 1.6 tech line, which is pretty good. And the Civic Si, ultimately its slowness did cost it, going into 102nd with a 144.969. Does beat the Golf GTI Mark 1, which is pretty good. Does slightly miss out on the Cooper S though. I would say the Cooper S, probably my preferred vehicle when it comes to those two. But yeah, good showing from all these Superminis here today, especially considering their diminutive size and their particular lack of power. But yeah, good showing from all the cars here today, and well, that wraps up this episode for today, friends. Thank you all very much for watching. In the next episode, we're going to be looking at something a lot quicker as we take a look at some of the ultimate track toys, so join me for that. Anyways, friends, I want to thank you all very much for watching. Mine has been the Real Emile, and until next time, farewell.